students and viewers, welcome back to the session on defense mechanisms. Today, we will discuss all type of defense mechanisms in detail and relevance of defense mechanisms in social work practice. Let us have a look at the learning outcome of the session. After completing this unit, the student will be able to understand the nature of defense mechanisms, features and typology of defense mechanisms, the relevance of defense mechanism in our day-to-day life, their typology and mental process associated with it. The relevance of defense mechanism in our day-to-day life and mental process associated with it. Let us take a quick revision of the last session. In the last session, we discussed the concept of defense mechanisms and some different type of defense mechanisms and concluded that to protect ourselves against anxiety and stress, our ego setups are mechanisms which are known as defense mechanisms. They are unrealistic and operate at unconscious level. They are usually exercised in combination. They soften failure, elevate anxiety and deprivation, and work as protection from feeling of inadequacy. Normally, they are adjunctive reactions and may be positive or negative. We discussed some different defense mechanisms like repression, projection, rationalization, regression, etc., which help us to better understand the classification of defense mechanism with personality. Let us now discuss other types of defense mechanisms in detail one by one. Next type of defense mechanism is reaction formation. Reaction formation refers to a transforming an unacceptable impulse, feelings or thoughts into its opposite. Reaction formation occurs when a person feels an urge to do. Reaction formation occurs when a person feels an urge to do or say something unacceptable and then does or says the opposite of what they will really want, acting the opposite of what one thinks or feels. We can say reaction formation helps the individual to maintain his adjustment with socially acceptable behavior and avoid awareness of fear of self-de-evaluating desires. For example, a woman who never wanted to have children becomes a supermom. Another example of reaction formation is someone frightens you and so you act super nice. Next example of reaction formation is acting like you hate someone but you really have a crush on. Next type of defense mechanism is displacement. An emotion is transferred from its original source to a more accessible substitute, redirecting thoughts, feelings, and impulses directed at one person or object but taken out upon another person or object. This defense mechanism is generally observed in the cases of anger and frustration. In displacement, the person ventilates his or her negative emotions, mainly anger and frustration, on a relatively harmless person or object. For example, a child depressed by lack of attention from her parents might vent out anger and frustration on her toys. Another example is you are upset with your boss, you go home and kick the dog, punching the wall or argue with spouse. Another example of displacement is a boy shouts of his younger sister after a teacher gives him bad grades. Next type of defense mechanism is sublimation. Sublimation is the highest level of ego defense and is taken as one of the most constructive defense mechanisms. It is resolving a conflict by changing a socially objectionable aim to an acceptable one. Channeling of unacceptable and potentially disruptive impulses, thoughts, or emotions into socially accepted behavior. Dealing with emotional stressors by using the energy in other usually constructive activities. Sublimation is a self-generated process. For example, sexual energy is often sublimated into creative tasks and aggression into hard work. A writer may sublimate his libido into creation of a book. Another example is a person with aggressive tendencies channels their energy into becoming a competitive athlete. There is another example of sublimation is going to the gym when angry with wife. Introjection refers to internalizing the qualities, traits of an object or person to oneself so as to reduce the painful awareness of or threat of fear of separation from that loved one. Unconsciously incorporating wishes, values, attitude of others as if they were your own. We can say adopting qualities from others that they see as desirable. Introjection may lead to maladaptive behavior and has also been understood as identification with the aggressor. It is a defense reaction involving the concept that if one cannot win over his enemy, he should join him. For example, a little child who is left alone frequently as their parents go out to work may try to become mom or dad so as to reduce fear. Another example for introjection is when a person changes his religion, he accepts the values and faith of the new religion. Next example is after a change in the form of government, people introject values and beliefs of the defense mechanisms, new government as a protective measure to themselves and avoid behavior that may result in social rejection or humiliation. Next type of defense mechanism is denial. Avoiding the awareness of some painful aspects of reality is denial. Individuals using this defense mechanism may often exhibit strong denial of reality in a repeated and forceful manner, refusing to believe or even perceive painful realities. Dealing with emotional conflicts or stress by refusing to acknowledge a painful aspects of reality or experience that would be apparent to others. For example, a partner denies evidence of his loved one's affair. A wife may deny the authenticity of the news of her husband. Another example for denial is a person diagnosed with a serious illness insists the doctors are wrong and avoids treatment. Next example can be other features of his mechanisms are to faint when confronted with a traumatic situation. Next type of defense mechanism is dissociation. In dissociation, in order to avoid emotional distress, the person disassociates and disconnects himself or herself from the painful reality. In extreme cases of dissociation, the person might develop a parallel identity in himself or herself to avoid emotional distress. For example, hearing the news of death of her only child, mother may cut off herself from all the sense of self or reality. Next type of defense mechanism is isolation. Isolation refers to serving the connection between the feeling and the situation in order to avoid painful reality. Defense mechanism of isolation to avoid feeling of emptiness and to maintain a self-image of being knowledgeable and self-sufficient. They isolate themselves in their heads away from their feelings and people. For example, someone may totally immerse himself in the social obligations surrounding the death of a loved one. Another example of isolation can be ability to explain traumatic events without associated disturbing emotions with passage of time. Next type of defense mechanism is undoing. Undoing covers uses of some actions or thoughts to neutralize the effects of something that was said or done, to avoid their guilt, to apologize themselves for their mistakes, bear punishment, confess, or express regret for any past disapproved act are various forms of undoing. For example, after beating and abusing his wife, a man may bring flowers and gifts for her, may try to be extra accommodating and caring. He tries to take extra care of his wife while trying to escape the guilt of his disapproving behavior. Next type of defense mechanism is acting out. Acting out occurs when an individual deals with emotional conflict or stressor by action rather than reflection or feeling. Behavioral outcome of conflict between an unconscious need to express anger and a conscious need to deny it. Through acting out reaction, a person reduces his anxiety and tension associated with a dangerous desire by allowing itself expression of acting out. For example, if a person feels that he has been mistreated by someone or discriminated against, he may become physically violent against the person he considered responsible for it. Another example for acting out is a wife who was quietly tolerating the atrocities, exploitation, abuse from her husband, kills him in a fit of rage is an example. Next type of defense mechanism is fantasy. When a person meets his needs or achieve any goal only in the imagination to overcome frustration, his ego exercises fantasy defense mechanism. An unrealistic wish to be considered as a great leader or a famous cricketer or an athlete or film actor with highly admirable performances are some of the features of fantasy. Fantasies provide some compensatory gratification to the individual and work as a preventive measure. For example, if someone feels frustrated with his involuntary job that never ends, may fantasize about winning the lottery or become a famous person to escape his current situation. Another example for fantasy can be a person may fantasize about bravely taking revenge like a hero on the person who has wronged him rather than confronting the situation head on. Next example for fantasy can be after the death of loved one, a person may fantasize about the deceased or his or her relationships to escape the pain or grief. Next type of defense mechanism is emotional insulation. Emotional insulation creates an attitudinal shield of non-caring in the individual, which protects him from unwanted emotions. When a person unconsciously or consciously protects himself from negative emotions or experiences to avoid or reduce emotional exposure, he uses emotional insulation. They develop the ability to moderate their expectations. They do not become over optimistic and carefully avoid premature, immature celebrations. For example, a student who has a fear of crowd and public speaking may avoiding giving presentation in class. For example, a student who has a fear of crowd and public speaking may avoid giving presentations in class. Another example can be a doctor who constantly faces life and death situation may detach himself emotionally to maintain his composure and effectiveness. Next type of defense mechanism is identification. Identification may operate as a defense mechanism by increasing feelings of worth and protecting the individual against self-de-evaluation. Identification as a defense instrument may be a way for people to manage with fear, frailty, or need for control by internalizing the characteristics, behaviors, or values for somebody they respect or, in a few cases, somebody they fear. For example, a child might learn to control their driving forces and behavior by mimicking their parents' responses and reactions. Another example we can have, one can try to learn a skill from someone he or she is a fan of so that she can get recognition and appreciations. Next example can be a child who is victim of physical abuse by someone and he becomes abusive towards others may mimic the behavior he was subjected to in an attempt to experience a sense of security. Next type of defense mechanism is compensation. When a person feels inferior or inadequate because of some real or imagined personal shortcoming or weakness or any setback and failure in life, he reacts in his defense thoughts compensation. The compensatory reaction or behavior may be a deciding factors for success in life. Mostly compensatory behavior is indirect. People make an effort to draw attention away from a defect or a weakness. For example, overcoming a physical handicap through sustained effort and exercise. Another example can be, often a physically unattractive person may develop a pleasing personality or a physically weak person may become good scholar instead of becoming an athlete. Another example for compensation can be, sometimes people criticize others to bring them down to their own level. Next type of defense mechanism is selective forgetting. Escaping from the avoiding undesired or painful by forgetting them is selective forgetting mechanism. In this mechanism, important fact or concept disappear from one's attention. This mechanism does not have any adverse effect as it happens in the normal course of forgetting. This selective forgetting disappears and the person's memory come back to its visual form after the expiry of the difficult situation. For example, a person may not be able to remember the details of a physically assault in order to avoid overwhelming feelings of fear and anxiety. Another example can be, selective forgetting is a girl's attempt to forget the negative experience of her past relationship with her boyfriend and move on and avoid the pain. Next type of defense mechanism is negativism. The expression of the flat refusal of any incident comes under this defense mechanism, through it is not considered to be healthy. A person using this defense mechanism may refuse to help in any conflict situation if he is approached during the time of conflict. This happens because of the fear of failure. For example, a person's deliberate violence of rules or instructions, even when it is obvious that it would be beneficial for him or her to follow them. Another example for negativism can be, a child refusal to clean his room despite repeated requests from parents is an example of negativity. Now, let us discuss about the relevance of defense mechanisms for social work practice. Though defense mechanisms are psychic functions, they have great significance for social work profession too. After gaining a complete understanding of these defense mechanisms, you may gain insight into the personality of human beings and may help you to understand the coping patterns of your clients in a better way. During your day-to-day interactions with family and friends, colleagues, and neighbors, you may observe people making use of these defense mechanisms differently depending upon their own perception of self, of social reality, socialization pattern, and experiences of life events. These psychic processes often go unnoticed and form of reality of our unconscious self. Others, through careful observation of our behavior, may tell about our certain behaviors as particular defense mechanisms. Further, while going through these defense mechanisms, you may come across terms like threatening stimuli, painful reality, anxiety, frustration, and so on. These are the conflicts arising out of interplay of id impulses and superego and ego trying to mediate. It is normal and natural to use defense mechanisms, but problem begin the certain people start overusing them, which then calls for professional intervention by expert in psychology or psychiatry. Understanding and recognizing defense mechanism is a crucial in social work practice because they influence client behavior, relationship, and overall functioning. Social workers use this knowledge to better understand clients' emotional reactions to stress and distress and to guide intervention that can help clients develop more adaptive coping strategies. Let us discuss relevance of defense mechanism in different manners. Like defense mechanism help us in understanding client's behavior, building therapeutic relationship, guiding interventions, identifying underlying issues, improving outcomes, facilitating change, promoting self-awareness. Let us discuss about one by one. Understanding client's behavior. Defense mechanism can explain why a client might be resistant to change, avoid certain topics, or exhibit specific behavior that seems illogical or out of proportion to the situation. Building therapeutic relationship. Understanding defense allows social worker to develop more empathetic and effective therapeutic approaches, recognizing that clients may be operating from a place of fear or anxiety. Identifying underlying issues. Defense mechanisms can be clue or deeper use. Identifying underlying issues. Defense mechanisms can be a clue to deeper issues or unresolved conflict that are affecting the client's well-being. Defense mechanism can guiding interventions. Recognizing the types of defense a client is using can help. Defense mechanisms can help us in guiding intervention. Recognizing the types of defense a client is using can help social workers choose appropriate intervention that address the client's needs and promote growth. Defense mechanism can help us in promoting self-awareness. By helping clients understand how they use defense mechanisms, social workers can empower them to develop more conscious and constructive coping strategies. Defense mechanisms can help us in promoting self-awareness. By using clients understand how they use defense mechanisms, social workers can empower them to develop more conscious and constructive coping strategies. Facilitating change. When social worker can identify and understand the client's defense, they can work towards helping the client gradually reduce reliance on these mechanisms and develop healthier coping mechanisms. It can improving outcome. Deeper understanding of defense mechanism can lead to better therapeutic outcome and more sustainable change in the client's life. Types of defense mechanism and relevance of defense mechanisms. Thank you.